Welcome back, everybody, for the second session. It's with the greatest of pleasure that I introduce to you Professor Marianne Cojannot-Le Blanc, who's Professor of Art History at Paris Ouest at Nanterre. Her field of scholarship deals with the European arts in the 16th and 17th century and focusing specifically on the political, institutional and theoretical backgrounds. She's published two very important books, one on Abraham Boss and more pertinent for today's lecture on Nicolas Poussin, on the ravissement, on the rapture of St. Paul. She's chosen a subject which one doesn't normally associate with Poussin. Is there room for laughter? Marianne.
Before I begin, let me wholeheartedly thank the Humanitas Visiting Professorship in Art History, Mr. Pierre Rosenberg and Mr. Jean-Michel Massing for inviting me. It is a great honor and a great pleasure to be here with you today. And please forgive me in advance if my English isn't as comprehensible as I'd like. I'll get straight to the point. Poussin and England. This theme might be self-explanatory for anyone focusing their research on the history of collections and museums. But as you might know, I am not a specialist in this field. For me, the words Poussin and England bring to mind another reality, born from a historiographic point of view. In the eyes of French art historians, Poussin is a sensitive subject. It would be unthinkable for one of the great figures of the French school of painting to become a laughing matter. If Poussin's famous modes were to be applied to the French historiography that is dedicated to him, it could be said that the literature about Poussin is overall grave and serious. Admittedly, Poussin's letters don't really project the image of a jolly fellow. They, no doubt, fuel the French critical tradition that tends to crown this major artist of our National Hall of Fame with a solemn halo of seriousness. But what I'd like to discuss here is an alternative take on Poussin. It was an English-written article that outlined this new perspective and introduced in a very stimulating way a geographical distance, a critical distance, and, last but not least, a bit of humor. In 2001, Christopher Hughes published in Art History a study of Rebecca at the Well. Not your version, but the one painted in 1648 for Pointel and located in the Louvre. Pierre Rosenberg has spoken about it in his first lecture, which, much to my regret, I wasn't able to attend. Let me simply remind you that this painting is famous for having received the active consideration of the Académie Royale de Peinture during a scholarly debate on the absence of camels in the composition, or, to put it in other words, on the arguments allowing one either to justify or to condemn Poussin's inaccurate representation of a story told in the Holy Scripture. Christopher Hughes, in his attempt to demonstrate that this painting is of a comical nature, thus starts on a decidedly new path. He begins with a description of the context in which this painting was commissioned. André reports that it has been realized in order to compete with another painting celebrated for its gracefulness, a Guido Reni's Madonna with Maidens. In this respect, the subject of Rebecca is to have been selected not primarily in its capacity as an edifying scene of the Old Testament, but to offer a pleasing sight, as it allowed to throw together in a composition a herd of good-looking girls, for lack of a camel herd. The extreme care taken by the painter to express the inconsistent actions and mixed feelings which go as far as undisguised spite could explain why some find Poussin's depiction amusing. Hughes' arguments for a comical reading of a painting operates, however, on another level. He suggests that art historians slightly change the way they incorporate the practice of typological exegesis in their analysis of religious paintings. It usually goes as far as identifying the implicit meaning of the depicted subject. The Israelites gathering the manna announced the Eucharist, and here, in a less direct way, Rebecca at the well prefigures the Virgin of the Annunciation. As for Hughes, he considers a form of redirection of the typological workings operating in the painting, which he sees as a series of formal memories building visual networks. These are then called upon in a slightly offbeat way so as to offer the spectator entertaining associations. For his Eliezer, Poussin not only is aware of the several meanings associated to this theme, but he also makes the most of the fact that the Annunciation is a codified iconographic motif, whereas the Eliezer isn't. The fact that Rebecca's gesture conjures up the conventional gesture of a Virgin of the Annunciation, and that, always according to the author, Eliezer reminds us, in the same way, of the one Archangel Gabriel, relies on a gap that the presence of the herd of girls increases by giving these gestures an unconventional meaning. In my opinion, imagining, like Hughes does, that Poussin could produce allusions that mirrored or reverts his imaginary prototype is a stimulating thought. Such an approach stands in complete opposition with the way Poussin's paintings sometimes get reduced to a catalogue of dull, scholarly quotes, like when Lebrun, in a study of the manna, lists every element quoting ancient statues. The idea of relying on textual associations constructed with the help of typology in order to use in an offbeat way certain very specific pictorial conventions certainly would cause surprise and satisfaction among Poussin enthusiasts and collectors. I am not sure, however, if seeing in his work a subversive and quirky spirit really is a defensible position. This painting is pleasant, no doubt, a little funny, even if one chooses to linger on how full of spite Rebecca's so-called friends are. So while it is true that it satisfies an art-loving public pleased to discover allusions to other works of art, is it really comical or even subversive? The enjoyable and the pleasing on one hand, the comical and the burlesque on the other, are two groups of concepts of fundamentally different nature. The fact that Poussin's work sometimes elicits a smile doesn't contradict the general representation we have of Poussin's poetic ambition, and is part of the delight he wished his patrons to experience. It's less easy to imagine someone laughing in front of a painting by Poussin. Proving that it can happen still remains to be done. To that effect, two categories of questions need to be asked. First, where is the comical to be found? Should we really look for it by imagining Poussin's intention, like Hughes does? Shouldn't we rather reflect on the possible comical reception of his paintings? Turning our effort in this direction means acknowledging the fact that it is almost impossible for historians to identify with certainty the intentions of an artist who lived several centuries ago. Secondly, how does this potential comical mechanism operate? I'll try to look into these questions by focusing on a painting located in the Louvre, The Ecstasy of St. Paul, which is, I believe, very dear to Pierre Rosenberg. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, I forgot to show the slides. The first for the inconsistent actions and the second one for the gesture of Rebecca and also Eliezer. There we are. So the ecstasy of St. Paul. Behind my interest in this painting, there is, on one hand, a personal fascination. To me, this is one of Poussin's most well-rounded painting. It is really a masterpiece. On the other hand, there is also the catalogue entry written by Pierre Rosenberg about it for the 1994 Grand Palais exhibition. The commission of this particular painting was quite unusual, since it was painted not for one of Poussin's faithful and regular patrons, but for an eccentric personality, the burlesque poet Paul Scarron, libertine and free spirit, who, despite being extremely crippled, he was both malformed and wasn't able to walk, was laughter incarnate, and was also one of the greatest Parisian writers of the time. As Pierre Rosenberg stressed it, everything separated the painter from his client, their temperaments as well as their artistic personalities, the lover of classical antiquity on one side and the author of a burlesque version of the Aeneid on the other. Now, it is well known that Poussin first considered painting a bacchanal, and then suddenly decided, instead, to paint for Scarron a representation of his patron saint being lifted to heaven. This sudden change of mind led Pierre Rosenberg to assume that Poussin wished to give a lesson in morality to his patron, whose irreverent frame of mind he was extremely displeased with, or to thumb his nose at him. Pierre Rosenberg's catalogue entry, while allowing one to understand the unique quality of this painting within Poussin's work, did not come to a definite conclusion. It wasn't really doable within the framework of a catalogue entry. It is this fundamental aspect to the work that I wanted to study more thoroughly, and that brings us back to my question for today. Is there room for laughter? Is the painting more a serious lesson of morals or more of a thumbing of the nose? The most important study on this painting, published by Charles Dempsey in 1999, addresses his invention in a very serious manner. In Dempsey's opinion, Poussin took pity on the crippled poet and chose to give him a profoundly Christian image to comfort him, a rapture, as a sign of hope beyond the physical suffering endured on earth. Thus, an important question remained. Is this painting to be taken at face value or with a little more distance and a pinch of salt? If we have before us a theme adapted from the Bible that can and must be grasped and tackled in a way that is akin to preaching, what meanings could have been associated with it? Just to clarify, these associations are not by Poussin's, or at least not only his, but Scarron's and Scarron's friends, wondering whether or not to take the painting and its components literally at face value or figuratively indeed means raising the issue of the role played by sight, by the act of looking, the gaze which a formal device in a painting allows or does not allow. It also means considering the artwork first and foremost in terms of its reception. Our objective is not to determine what meanings Poussin wanted to load this painting with, but to identify rather how Scarron might have seen it. Scarron, and it has been insufficiently investigated, was nothing like Poussin's usual patron, on whom was built the framework we now usually use to analyze Poussin's painting, for instance, the interpretation of subjects in light of the patron-painter relationship. It is not even clear whether or not Scarron appreciated painting. He just had his mind set on owning a Poussin, as the painter was, around 1650, very much in fashion in Parisian literary circles. And Scarron pulled it off. He is, among all French writers, the one that managed, through his friendship with Chanteloup, to get a Poussin. Another certainty, Scarron was a man as rare as they come, with a mind of great intelligence, insolence, and quick wit. He had a hand in everything, turning the smallest thing into a triumph of language and wit, making a mockery of absolutely everything. If you allow me this rather daring comparison, he was a little like some TV hosts that make people laugh by always responding to the tristest sentences in a humoristic way. In his letters, Poussin had to give Chanteloup lessons so that he could understand his paintings. As for Scarron, he may have not known anything about painting, but he didn't need any lessons to bring it to life in words and in company. Scarron most likely was less dull and a lot funnier in front of a painting by Poussin than Chanteloup. Poussin had to know that his painting was going to become conversation fodder and would be a bit of an attraction in the largest Parisian salon. Pierre Rosenberg showed us yesterday that funny painting of Sir James Thornhill showing his Poussin to his friends. Scarron was probably a little bit like that. With this in mind, it is not surprising for this painting to be so formally complex. Here, Poussin really didn't botch his subject of a patron saint for a patron who didn't interest him. Now then, let's have a closer look at this painting. Unfortunately, I will only be able to graze its surface, but we shall try, anyway, to look at it the way Scarron maybe would have, rather than in the manner of Chanteloup or Pointel. I believe it allows, without difficulty, a decidedly comical reading. Thus, the choice made by the painter to break off the pictorial tradition, wedging the rapture motif inside an architectural framework, where the upward momentum of a group seems destined to inevitably meet the ceiling or the vault that is masked by the cloud. And what is there to say about this ecstasy of St. Paul, in theory, already in the third or seventh heaven, and that culminates in the painting a mere few inches of the ground? What kind of horrors could a debauched cripple still want to profess about a painting that, by the Dassault in Sous treatment of the figures, gives the impression of showing un bouquet of legs? And, as far as I know, no one looking at this painting can stop themselves from counting the legs and from making sure that each trunk is paired in a manner as anatomically correct as possible with a set of legs. It all adds up naturally. But what a complexity! From Poussin, we aren't used to such tortuous representations. But what a happily conceived complication if we just stop to think about how much it probably gave Scarron's twisted mind to chew over. When one looks at it carefully, one realizes that nothing in this painting is completely in its place or completely coherent. I will only mention one example. If Poussin is known to be able to construct depth and to master perspective, it is here impossible to work out how the different places connect to one another, as well as to rationally understand how the figures fit in these places. Let me explain. The cloud spreads out until it reaches the front of a building architecture, which it hides from view on both sides of a painting, near the edges. The figures are represented in front of a cloud, which places them in the very foreground of the painting. In parallel, however, the very complex alternation of light reflections and projected shadows on the sword can only come from the group of figures and the intertwined legs. That same sword, however, which particularly draws the attention of the viewer by its central and isolated position, is placed at the same time on the niche, which is supposed to be, according to the perspective, largely behind the figures. But nothing in the painting, particularly the sources of light suggested in it, makes such a placement of the shades possible or even conceivable. This painting by Poussin, in addition to being potentially comical, could be even considered in a burlesque light, for example, by making fun of this rapture that might be spectacular, but is also trapped in a box in an architectural space. The painting, though, was not only dedicated to Scarron. The poet, confined in his chair, was entertained at home by personalities of the Parisian literary world, and some of them would have dreamt of owning a Poussin. Those people, passionate about emblematic culture, loved to look for meanings hidden behind obvious ones, but also loved to achieve a social success through their wit. May the wittiest win. Poussin's painting, in the end, can be seen as a stroke of genius. It might not be by chance that this painting is one of his greatest colorist paintings. The knot of bodies, the central and radiant interlacing of the group, the choice made to represent an ascending motion blocked in, stopped by an illogical place, constitute a pictorial shape offered to the viewers for their full satisfaction. I don't know if Poussin intended to do precisely what I see in his work as an art historian, nor do I know for sure what Scarron and his friends saw in it. But I can say with confidence that what sets this painting apart in Poussin's work is that it allows a span of interpretations, appropriations by the spectator, that is considerably broader than usual, broader and more extensive than when Poussin creates painting in charted territory for Cassiano dal Pozzo, Szanto, or Pointel. Here, Scarron might be a nuisance, but he offers Poussin a platform in Paris. Poussin knew that people were waiting for him to trip, people who made a mockery of everything and everyone anyway. His painting had to offer an outstanding resistance. It had to be able to evade attempts to trap it within a particular theme of subject or within a particular meaning. Even if it was seen with distance and irreverence, this painting could only lead its viewer and the rest of the smart set to admit how exceptionally multifaceted it was, and therefore to tip their hats to it. Let us come back for a moment to its creator. Poussin's great intelligence was perhaps to have been able to open up through this rapture of St. Paul, using a peerless formal complexity, an incredible range of concealed meanings, to have managed to create a painting for Mr. Scarron, which was a much greater challenge than simply finding a subject suitable for Mr. Scarron. Thank you.